Alright, hey everyone. Today's video is going to be turning flat shapes into three-dimensional shapes. In the last video, we talked about lines and kind of like how I feel like they're important basically further down the line. I think they're further down the line. But yeah, they will kind of always be important, especially later on. They'll always kind of carry the drawings, I think. Even with painting, I think lines are still very important, especially when you get pretty deep into like rendering, drawing, and that sort of thing. So the step two for kind of like this mini series of beginner artists to more advanced, I guess. So step two, I would do shapes, simple shapes to three-dimensional shapes. And so from the lines that we did on the last video, there's kind of in these different directions and a bunch of different angles. And the one hard line that I kind of would struggle a lot with is sort of that backhand motion that I guess a lot of people would probably just turn the page to get kind of that kind of line to go. But yeah, I just like to just do the backhand and just get used to it because it's really useful and I don't like to like stop and turn the page. I think it's a lot more fun to just kind of be in the drawing as much as possible. So yeah, I think lines and bunch of different like variations, like kind of having them go from different ways. And so from these lines, we can make them into basic shapes. So we learned how to do the lines. So if we connect four lines together, we get a square. And then we have a circle. And we could do a triangle just to add a bit more shape variety. So we have these shapes. I'll quickly kind of like color them in. Okay, so we have our three simple shapes. And so kind of like how do we make this three-dimensional without getting into perspective or anything like that? But basically, we just need more sides to it or more dimension. The circle is basically already kind of a sphere, like it's already in a three-dimensional space. The only thing that will really make this look more three-dimensional is if we kind of add things to compare it to, or we start to add shadow to it. And adding shadow to a circle basically kind of turns it into a sphere. So that's one way to make it more three-dimensional. And you can add shadows to it. And I'll talk about shadows in a future video, but without that, basically another piece next to it would start to make it look more three-dimensional. So if we take away the shadow to make this look three-dimensional with just our lines, we can add basically a platform to it. And now this ball feels like it kind of sits downward onto some kind of space there. So that's a simple way to make like a circle into a sphere, is actually add in something that's like in relation to it, next to it. And for the other ones, they're a bit easier because they have like very noticeable side planes to them. So like the circle itself is going to have a ton of different of these like tiny basically planes to them. It's going to be like too many to draw out, but to make it round, it basically has to take like a ton of different squares or surfaces on this to make it round. So very simply, we can just add something else to make it, or add the shadow onto it. So that's kind of the ways that I would go about to make a circle into a sphere. It's a lot easier, not too complex. And then for the triangle into a pyramid, from this angle, we can simply just add the side plane there. And then it sort of sits on something like this. And then the square, if we want to go a bit similar, we need to add some kind of like roof to the top. And that would make our box. And then I'll go with a bit of a brighter color up here. Okay. And then so what we're kind of seeing the box from this is, so the box has multiple sides to it. So for it to sit on something, I think it'd be a bit easier if I draw platform and something like this. Okay. All right, so now we have some three-dimensional shapes, and I'll explain a bit how we got there. So if we think of the box in sort of like papered out or flat, if you think of like a shipping box, like an Amazon package box or something, and it's completely flat, it would look something like this. And so we have these different sides, and then I mean we would probably have like an extra one for our top piece that would come out. But yeah, so the box like unfolded would look like this, where we have one of the, our front side could be here, which is that green part. And then our top, which could be this extra fold that we could fold on top. And then so if we numbered these, the green would be number 1, and then our yellow is number 2. So this is the box folded up. And then so to get to this, we basically need to fold all of these sides inward. This green one would have to basically flip up, and this would be like our base floor, which I'll get a new color. Okay, our base floor, and we'll put this as 3. And this would be like somewhere down here. We won't even see it, but it's down below the box, sitting on top of this other platform. And then all right, so I got these other ones colored, and we'll have this as 4, 5, and 6. So yellow, we want to fold on top. So if I start with a base, and let's say this is number 3, then we have number 5. So let's say we fold up the edges first. So we have number 5 here, and then 2 is a bit behind here. So let's say we fold it up 2, so they basically started, and it's kind of hanging off there. And we'll have our number 1 here. And then just for like a bit of visual kind of, we'll have number 4, and then maybe number 6 we didn't fold up yet. But this is basically how to go from the flat shapes into something that's more three-dimensional. And not that you have to draw like something this elaborate, but it's just kind of like a demonstration of sort of how the box would go from a bit of a flat thing to having a bit more shape to it. And I kind of wanted to have some of it a bit flat, so like 3 and 6 are still flat to the ground. So hopefully it kind of like made sense, the transition. But I didn't want to go from a full box right away, so I feel like the in-betweens help a bit. Okay, so we have 6 and then 4. Four and 5. All right, so notice how number 1 is starting to cover a bit of number 5. And that's just like an overlap. And that's really important for, like, it's probably one of the more important things for when drawing and painting is overlaps. It'll make your drawings look more realistic, more like dynamic, really, and more interesting as well. So I feel like it kind of adds a bit of mystery, because whenever something's sort of covered up, it kind of adds a bit of mystery of like what's behind it. And it also will make drawing easier because we actually need to draw less with an overlap. Similar to this box up here with only 1 and 2 showing for the sides. we don't need to draw like all of these other planes. We only need to draw 1 and 2 because these other ones are all hidden back behind here. So if I was to draw the rest on this platform, would have went a little too deep there. All right, so it's a little off, but the other ones would basically sit in here. So we'd have 5 on that side. Back, we'd have 4, and then our 6, and then our 3 being our base. So we don't need to draw all of the different panels there because we don't see those panels. So we only see 1 and 2 sitting on there. And then so we fold it up, and then if we were to fold it up all the way, I wish I didn't have so much here. All right, so I made myself a bit more space. Yeah, so we have basically the folding over or covering effect that happens from these planes just makes drawing a lot easier. So down the road, we won't really be drawing like every single plane and all of that sort of thing. It'll get really complex and it's really not needed for a lot of things. But the overlaps help a lot. So, and like I said, the sphere, I can't really like show too much for making it 3-dimensional. But the thing that we can do with the circle is, so if I have a circle like so, it's flat, it has like 1 dimension pretty much to it. And we can color this in. And a useful shape for this circle is to make it into a cylinder, which basically is just 2 circles. That we have like this. And so we're going to connect them with 2 lines. So yeah, it's kind of why I wanted to talk about lines on the first episode of this, is that we're using lines constantly, and the more control you can kind of get over these lines, the better. But I won't necessarily practice it like on its own. You can if you want, but while doing these shapes, we're also practicing lines. And these are like very specific scenarios, I guess, that are a little bit hard to practice without drawing the actual shape itself. So we have the cylinder, and we'll go with a different color. I'll put it underneath. All right. So the cylinder is, I feel like, a little bit easier than a square, at least for this sort of thing. So we only have really 3 kind of planes to it. So this middle one is a bit like if you folded a piece of paper, and then we have our 2 circles here. So I think if you can kind of think of the shape like this, it'll make it a lot easier down the road that these are kind of like sectioned up into these different pieces. And so it is like one whole shape, like it's the cylinder itself, but then it also has these different parts of it. And the parts are really good for like visualizing or thinking of how you want to go about characters and different things down the road. Like this kind of paper effect that's happening will be like very common with a lot of things. All right, so yeah, we have the cylinder, which if you can really try to think of it as this sort of like paper wrapping around, and then you have these two connectors that will basically, and then this paper is kind of wrapping around like so, and it's the same as this other one. And then same with the cube, if you can kind of think of it as these connection points and these different surfaces. It'll just come in handy later, and it'll kind of help a lot with like rotating this object in space. So, and we could go even like another in between of these boxes. So once we put up our four sides, then we would just have the top, which was our number 2 or number 1, 5, 4, 6, and then our base, our 3, we just went C. So yeah, a little bit of like a more advanced thing, I guess, with the overlaps. But the earlier that you can kind of really think that something is going to block in front, I think will help a lot down the road. Like that's definitely something that I would have wished that I would have focused on a lot more, because it just comes up like so often. And animation, when you're doing scenes, characters, I guess the overlaps are probably the one of the main things, and it'll give you a lot of freedom as well, because if you don't really play around with overlaps, you will run into a lot of characters or things that you draw where you start drawing like too much, and it'll actually make your drawing speed up a lot more, and they'll look better. They'll be like more efficient, because if you don't do overlaps, then you'll run into kind of like, I feel like you'll kind of confuse yourself in a bit of, because you'll draw the box, and then like it's important, I think, to be able to draw through the objects, but always drawing these different things and not necessarily like knowing where the what blocks out what will just make it a bit confusing, especially if you're drawing a character and he is sort of like there's just a lot of poses that will come up where his shoulder and arm are in front, and you'll want to it'll just be really hard to draw something like this where he is having his arm back and his leg and different things like this. So this pose confused me a lot, or like the idea of it, where you have basically these overlap in shapes. So his arm is coming out in front, and there's like quite a bit of overlaps here. So his arm, and especially when it comes to anatomy, which I'll get into like later down the road, having knowing about these overlaps ahead of time will just save a lot of like headaches, I guess, since this like the arm is over this chest area, so I don't need to draw much of the chest, and I also don't need like much of the upper shoulder, so I don't need to draw like the traps really, and it's just kind of like all overlapping over. So yeah, just kind of like, and a lot of the face too, there's a lot of angles that if you if you can think of overlaps already at an early stage, drawing angles from like up shots and different things will just make a lot more sense, and it'll just be like a lot easier to kind of like visualize or understand why when it's a upshot or something, the like the other eye is not showing, or we don't see as much of the eye or the brow, and so, or like why the hair looks like it's not as big as like a front shot or something like that. So just kind of that concept of the overlaps will just help a lot. So yeah, just the different angles and the overlaps, how we have these boxes will come into play a lot when we start to do characters in the later videos. And if you can kind of think of these as different sections, the pyramid, I think, or our triangle is probably the last one. This one's kind of rare, I feel like, for drawing. I don't really draw this shape too much, but it does have like um, some uses to it. But usually when I'm drawing like a pyramid for like horns or something else, it's like a very elongated pyramid or something like this. So, but yeah, I'll talk in future videos kind of more about morphing these shapes. But it still kind of has its use for sure. Like all of these shapes are basically the same in the sense that we have this sort of plane, and then we're basically like the box, we're attaching another plane to it to give it some depth. So it doesn't matter if this like if the back end of this is round and it comes out like this, or if we have like the pyramid is basically a box with just a point at the top. And then if our base was 3, so yeah, I feel like the pyramid doesn't really need too much explanation, really. I guess the point can be a bit different, but it's also like the same as a point on a box. Like each of these corners pretty much will be the same thing, or like this corner. But basically the idea of the pyramid is just that you have to simplify it. I think thinking of the square base that it has would help a lot. So if we can kind of picture this base, which I think I had marked as 3, and then we'll have like this center. Want more of a yellow in that. Okay, and then we have the center. If we take the center of this square, and then from there, basically shoot upward. All right, so we go upward with it from the center. And then from that center point, we're basically pulling down these lines just like you would the box. And so something like that. And then we could go through and kind of color code it the same. If this is our number 1 and our number 3 was a bit dark. So yeah, the pyramid definitely has uses. It can simplify like the nose and maybe even like the neck, some of the neck muscles or different things like that. So yeah, these are pretty much the 3 basic shapes I would say are probably the most useful. And then from these, it's a lot of just manipulating them to change how they are. So we could go and number this like the other ones. Yeah, the series is definitely not going to have like the most beautiful drawings for these demos. So um it's like not any of my best work, so I definitely wouldn't judge on anything that I do in these because they're going to be very like quick, and I'm drawing while explaining, so it's a bit of a different kind of thing than just when I'm not recording and drawing my own stuff. But yeah, it's still, I think the point will still come across, and I'll try to make it as like clean and descriptive as possible. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for taking shapes from flat to 3D. I wouldn't worry about perspective like grids or anything like that. I think just practicing these alone, just like trying to make 3-dimensional shapes first, and then just get in a feel for it. And like I said, with like all these steps, you don't need to master any of them before moving on. I think it can be really helpful to like know what's ahead. And so if you kind of like work through these episodes and you get to a point where it's like, okay, the next step is like really, really difficult, then you could sort of backtrack and try to practice a bit more of these, like going from the simple shapes to a 3-dimensional, and see if that helps. And if that doesn't work, then you could always just try to like keep trying the harder like future lessons or guides that I'm gonna do. And a lot of the progression with drawing just takes a lot of patience, because drawing is a lot of skills are very slow progress. And I feel like drawing has such a very wide like skill like timeline. It's out of a lot of skills, it kind of just is infinite. There's like so much that's not really explored, and it just takes a lot of time, a lot of drawing over and over. I think one of the best things you can really do is experiment a lot and try to like, I don't know, like with the cylinder, like trying to do the paper thing, or kind of like, oh, if I took one of these different spots off this cube, like what would it look like without that front platform anymore? Like what would kind of be the overlap? Or if I put a ball underneath this, like kind of what would that look like? And just different things like that. It might not be like the most interesting, these original like video kind of concepts, but down the road they'll be like a lot more useful, and you'll kind of just like skip a lot of problems and different things that might arise from just kind of knowing these things. So, and I mean, if it really is driving you crazy and you don't like kind of like drawing boxes, drawing lines, whatever, I would always suggest like still practicing or still drawing like whatever you want along the way, even though these like videos are kind of step by step, like how I would go about drawing these things from however, like drawing anything basically in any way. You can still basically draw anything. Like you don't really need someone to tell you how to do it. Just kind of the experience alone will just make you better and better. And every day we kind of like witness all of these things already. Like we already know kind of like how the human body looks like without diagrams and different things. So it's not really needed, but this whole like series is just kind of if I was to dissect and kind of like take these different, parts and just break them down to maybe make them a bit like easier to understand. So yeah, just kind of that's really the whole goal with it, is to make it like easily digestible and make it a bit yeah, just kind of set you up for future things so that they just become a bit easier and sort of like guide a path, I guess. So yeah, that's gonna do it for the simple shapes. Basically taking flat shapes into three-dimensional without using perspective or anything. And this is just like purely add in more planes to it. So yeah, I hope this kind of helps. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one.